Good evening. Welcome to L'Dor Va-Dor's weekly Torah study and chat with Rabbi Barry Silver. It is December 14th, 2021, and we welcome everybody to this wonderful weekly program where we discuss the upcoming Torah parsha for the upcoming Shabbat. And if you have any questions about this parsha, a previous parsha, last week's, last month's, or anything, an upcoming one, please feel free to discuss that after Rabbi's told us a little bit about the upcoming one. So thank you very much, and welcome Rabbi Barry, and welcome guests and members, and thank you.
Thanks a lot, Sharon, for putting this together, and thank you everyone for joining us. Sid asked an interesting question. Do you discuss the Torah passage that's coming up, or the one that was last Friday that's kind of in governing this week? And I said, well, we discussed what's coming up, but actually it makes sense to discuss the passage this week from now on. Now, we already did that last Tuesday, but this story all blends together. So it would be really hard to discuss the passage coming up without discussing what happened last week, so we can do it together. But in the future, I think it's a good idea to maybe discuss the current one and maybe give a foreshadowing of what's coming up next. So if you recall, in the last passage, it was one of the most dramatic episodes, sagas in the Torah, and indeed all of literature. Joseph makes himself known to his brothers, and he clears out the court. Everybody out, he says, all you leave except for his brothers. Now, Joseph must have been a very good linguist, because he was raised in Canaan and showed up in Egypt when he was at least 18 years old. Most people, by the time they're 17, 18 years old, would have an accent. He would have had a Canaanite accent when he spoke Egyptian, and his brothers could have detected that. But apparently, he had no accent. They didn't put two and two together. And out of all the brothers, not one of them figured out who he was. So they were stunned. The Torah says they were muted by being just totally flabbergasted and nonplussed. They didn't even know how to respond when they heard Joseph say to them, I am your brother. And then he was very compassionate to them and told them, don't blame yourself. It's not your fault. Many people think that was such a nice thing that he did for his brothers, and it was. But it was also a great thing he did for himself. They say that if you teach a child not to step on a caterpillar, you not only help your child, not only help the caterpillar, you help your child. When you teach compassion and forgiveness, it works for you. Because Joseph, if he was vindictive, would have been deprived of this beautiful reconciliation and this wonderful rapprochement with his father and his brothers, and a beautiful life that he had in Egypt afterwards. And so forgiving is not just done to benefit the other person, but yourself. There's certain things that you shouldn't forgive, and certain things you need to hear an apology before you forgive them. I'm not suggesting that no matter what somebody does and how awful, and if it's still ongoing, you should say, hey, no worries, I forgive. But you should always try your best to forgive. And especially if the other person shows remorse and says that they were wrong and they want to go a separate way, it would be very boorish not to forgive in those circumstances. And so he does forgive, and then he cares for his family in the land of Goshen, which is a part of Egypt closer to Canaan, a very fertile part where the people prospered. And they prospered a little too much, because later on it says that the Egyptians got nervous because they were multiplying so fast. So what happens in this passage? This passage is called Va-YECHI. Now, those of you who are astute might notice in Va-YECHI, there's a couple of letters that you might recognize. Chai. Va means and. Ye is changes the tense. Chi means life. So Va-YECHI means and he lived. The passage talks about the life of Jacob when he comes down to Egypt, and then also the life of Joseph. As I mentioned, Joseph was very arrogant as a youth, but his arrogance seemed to be justified because everything seems to revolve around Joseph. And so it says in the Torah that Joseph was 17 years old when they begin to tell the stories about his dreams and his being sold into slavery. And Jacob, it says, lived 17 years in Egypt. So Joseph arranges for him to come down to Egypt to avoid the famine. And he lives there 17 years, the same amount of years that Joseph was when all these things happened to him. So everything kind of like revolves around him. The passage describes the death of Jacob and the death of Joseph, but it's called, and he lived. Some people wonder why not say, and he died. Why not talk about that? The reason is obvious. Jewish people celebrate life. We're much more interested in their lives than we are in the death. In Egypt, their holiest book was the Book of the Dead. It told all about what happens when you die and you go off into some other world. At least if you were a pharaoh. If you were a commoner, you might go as a slave or you didn't get an afterlife. But if they built you a nice sarcophagus, you could go to another world. And that's where the real action was, after death. Judaism is the opposite. We don't have a Book of the Dead. We celebrate life. And so the passage that describes the death of Joseph and Jacob is called Va-YECHI, and he lived. A couple of interesting things in this passage. It's rather short, but there are some good parts to it. One is Joseph says, and Jacob, that they want to be buried in Canaan. They don't want to be buried in Egypt. Part of that might have been that they have all these weird, ghoulish rituals for what happens to the dead, but also their essence was in Canaan. They wanted to be buried in Canaan. According to the Torah, the words that Joseph used is ha'alitem et atzmotai mizeh. Ha'alitem is related to the word aliyah. It means may you lift up or carry up. Et is a word that follows certain verbs. It has no meaning. It's just a grammatical form that comes after certain verbs. So ha'alitem et atzmotai. Etzem means bone. Atzmot is the plural. It means bones. Atzmotai means my bones. So carry up my bones, mizeh, from here. But etzem means something else. Etzem, the word for bone, also means the essence. And the words are similar, your bones, your essence. So it could also be interpreted, it's always translated, carry my bones up to Canaan. That's what everybody thinks. I like to think that maybe what he was saying is, carry my essence back to Canaan. The message of who I am, my legacy, the traditions of the Jewish people, and the message that I'm conveying, carry this message of my essence up into Canaan so that it will continue there and not be buried with me in Egypt. Another interesting part of the passage that I like, again, it doesn't seem on its face to mean very much, but you kind of have to read into it to get there. It says, Yisimcha Elohim ke'Ephraim v'Menashe. And what that means is translated is, it's a blessing that is given to sons. If you want to bless your children, you say to them, V'simcha Elohim ke'Ephraim v'Menashe. May you be blessed as Ephraim and Menashe. Some people find this rather peculiar. Why mention Ephraim and Menashe? These are two of the least known people in the Bible. If you were to ask someone, describe the life of Ephraim and Menashe, you'd be hard pressed for anyone to tell you anything. There's not much written about them in the Torah anyway. It's not like Abraham or Moses or Jacob, Joshua. No, no, no. So what's so special about these guys? Well, nobody really knows, but the way I look at it is this. It says that these two, Ephraim and Manasseh, who were they, among all the brothers who were fighting and arguing, these two got along. They established friendly relations with each other. And so maybe what the Torah is trying to tell us is that Jewish people should get along with one another. And if the two of you get along, if two people get along like brothers, that's a beautiful thing. So maybe that's what it has in mind when it says, may you be like Ephraim and Manasseh. May you be at peace and in harmony with your brethren. Another interesting part of the passage is when the brothers find out that Joseph, the leader of Egypt, is actually their brother, they're flabbergasted, and they just fall down. It says they fall down on their faces and they bow down to him. And they bow down to him like they're his slaves, which is ironic because that's exactly what happened in his dream when Joseph was younger. They're bowing down to him. So they bowed down to him. And when he was younger, he was gloating over, wow, you guys are going to bow down to me. Isn't this great? But this time, now that he's matured, they bow down to him. And he says, I'm going from memory, I believe these are exact words, Ha'im ani tachat Adonai. What he's saying is, what are you doing? Am I a god to you? Get up, get off your knees. What is this? And how could a person be a substitute for God? So the maturity of Joseph is remarkable in that he now has them literally at his feet. And he's saying, I'm not interested in having you worship me or bow down to me. All I want is to be your brother and to share love and to take care of you and to love you. I just want to be reconciled with my family. That's all I want. And so it's a beautiful, beautiful passage. Teaches us so many wonderful lessons about don't worry about fame and fortune. It's nice if you can have it and do something good. But what's really important, the essence, the etzem, is to be at peace with a loving family. That's what it's all about. So these are the main messages of the passage. If you'd like to share any thoughts or comments about the passage, I'd love to hear from you, or anything else that's going on in the world today. A lot of stuff happening in the world today, but this passage is definitely worthy of our attention. It should not just be skipped over and overlooked. Anybody, go ahead, Sharon.
So there's a blessing that on Friday nights that you're supposed to give sons and daughters for Shabbat each week.
Yeah, this is the
one.
One.
Is that the blessing about Ephraim and Manasseh?
Yeah, that's the one.
So they don't even have a girl in there. It's only the two guys. Okay.
Well, no, there's another blessing. There's another blessing for daughters.
Okay.
Okay, so there is one for the blessing for daughters. I believe, I'm not sure. I believe it's may you be like Leah and Rachel and Sarah and Rebecca. I believe that's the blessing. But it's interesting that these two guys aren't patriarchs at all. They're just two guys that get along. But I guess in a family with people selling each other into slavery and sacrificing almost their son and all these things, that's it. That's pretty good.
So these are these two of Joseph's brothers, or just other characters?
I believe they're Joseph's brothers.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm sorry, his sons.
Oh. Joseph's son. Okay. Anybody else have anything to say? I know Sid was asking about last week's parsha. You did a little mini wrap up of it.
Yeah, I covered last week too, because it ties in with this week. Anybody else want to comment on the passage, or anything at all, or what's going on at L'Dor Va-Dor? We got a lot of things happening here too. Anything at all?
Dan, do you have your hand raised, or you just, okay. Okay.
I'm just curious, just as an opinion, with what was in the news with regard to Sirhan being released on parole. They had a big interview with the Kennedy children, the now adult children. And they feel very strongly that he is still very much a potential threat. He's never apologized, and he's claiming not to even have remembered shooting Bobby Kennedy. So I was just wondering what anybody's opinion is. My personal opinion is, it's issues like this when they have a Charles Manson or a Sirhan, or those people who have committed absolutely unquestionable heinous crimes and murders, to spend a life in prison, that I have to support them. And I really have a problem with that. And then when their sentences are possibly commuted to life, it really isn't life at all, because once you say life, they're now eligible for parole. And I think that's wrong, my personal opinion. And I was wondering if anybody else had an opinion of that.
Anybody want to comment on that?
Are you saying that it's okay to release them?
Am I saying that? Hell no. I'm saying that he is up for parole and he was granted parole.
I think Stanley was asking because you said it costs so much money to incarcerate them. It
Yeah,
seemed
well,
like you were suggesting. I think what you're saying is they should be executed, right?
I feel in certain very, very limited circumstances, when it's really absolutely beyond a question of a doubt, that should not be taken off the table. That's my opinion. Because
Go ahead, Stanley. Stanley, you must have a comment on that.
Well, I mean, these are horrible people. To put them back out on the street, not for me. I wouldn't be in favor of that. However, I mean, looking at the Torah parsha, we're supposed to forgive.
And we're also supposed to have an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. So let's not go down that road, because there's contradictions all over the place. And I think Rabbi Barry knows that.
Yeah, well, let's use reason and common sense as our guide, as well as the passages from the Torah. So what happened here? That was a very heinous crime that the brothers did. They didn't kill him, but they intended to. They had conspired to kill him. And then Judah said, no, don't kill him. Let's sell him into slavery. At least that way we don't have blood on our hands and we can make some money at the same time. So it's commuted or softened somewhat. But what they did was horrible. But they also apparently showed remorse in that Judah said, let me stay as your slave and release Benjamin, because we don't want our father to go to his grave so despondent. And so Joseph tested them according to the Torah and saw that they had shown remorse and that they had matured. Now, this is just one of the brothers, but supposedly he's like representing all of them. So you could say in this instance that the brothers, certainly they wept, they cried, they embraced, they showed remorse, but you could say, well, not really. They didn't, each one didn't say, I'm sorry I did wrong, but supposedly here they showed remorse. The Torah has some things that are exceptionally vicious and barbaric by our standards. It's not just an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, which the rabbis claim never really happened, but it's execution for picking up sticks on the Sabbath, disrespecting a parent, for worshiping the wrong God or in the wrong way, or not being a virgin when you're married, when you get married if you're a woman. I mean, you name it, there's a death penalty for it. So it's barbaric. Well, you wouldn't want to repeat or institute this type of legal system. It would make Sharia law look like it was some kind of liberal legal system. You wouldn't want to do it. So there's some very harsh things in the Torah, but there's also some very conciliatory things and some things that show that we should forgive. The whole Yom Kippur syndrome is all about forgiveness and not bearing a grudge. So how do we interpret that? Well, a modern Jew would say, well, the legal standard they had then isn't our standard. So we can use that to learn from as a launching pad, but we're not enslaved by it. The Orthodox would tend to say, well, that's what we should do, but they have some ways of rationalizing why they don't really do it. I think, though, if we use common sense, first of all, there are people in jail right now who are just rotting away in jail for doing things that shouldn't be offenses for which they should be incarcerated. For instance, there's people with a drug problem, and maybe they're using marijuana. Many people use marijuana, nothing happens to them. In some states it's legal. Other people get locked up for years for using marijuana. I don't think that's a good use of our resources. I don't think people should be incarcerated. I find the use of marijuana to be pernicious. I think it's very harmful. I don't care for it. I feel the same way about soda. I don't think you should lock somebody up for using soda either. So I'm not in favor of incarceration, and people are being let go early because there's not enough room for people in jails because of all the drug offense. Same thing with the driver's license. A friend of mine pleaded with me to get him out of jail because he's in jail for driving on a suspended license, and he might be there for 10 years. I think that's very, very harsh. So I think we need to have common sense. If somebody truly has a drug problem, rehabilitation might be a better way than incarceration. On the other hand, I tend to agree with you, Valerie, and you, Stanley, that if somebody commits a really vicious act, a violent act, I think we need to draw the line. Violent and acts which harm only yourself. Now, acts that harm yourself can also harm other people. If you're drinking, you could harm somebody else, but a violent act and an act where you take history into your hands and you kill a really wonderful person like Robert F. Kennedy, it's got to be really, really serious. And you shouldn't just let him out willy-nilly, especially, Valerie, if, as you say, I don't know the details, but if he hasn't apologized, that's horrible. And if he says, well, I don't remember, that's perhaps even worse. I mean, if we knew he did it and he didn't remember, he should say, I can't believe I did this. I feel so horrible. And maybe he should devote his life to trying to do something to offset it. And if he did that, then maybe he showed some kind of rehabilitation. There are people who, when they're 15, 16, 17, 18, do horrible things. And then in prison after 5, 10, 20 years, they're like a completely different person. And I believe in the death penalty. I think if somebody does a really horrible act and you know it for sure, not you think they did it. If you got the goods on them, you know they did a horrible thing, not just even murder, but murder and torture and multiple murders. I have no problem with the death penalty. And by the way, the Torah, of course, doesn't either. So I don't have a problem with that. But if you're going to put the guy in jail and then in 10, 20 years, they're like a completely different person and they're like living a good life, helping other people, then maybe you should consider letting him out. I would. That's just my thinking on it. But like everything else, I think you got to use common sense. If you just say everyone who does a violent act or commits a crime, just throw them in jail forever, that's crazy. And if you're going to say, well, let's forgive everybody, let's let them all go, that's crazy too. So I think we need to use common sense and rational thought. And I think the legal system too often doesn't do that. And they also put people in jail who didn't do the crime. The juries make mistakes all the time. And we have one of the best systems around, but it's still pretty bad, in my opinion, having worked in the system. Anybody else? Go ahead, Sid.
Unmute yourself, Sid.
Okay, so what wasn't eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth? Wasn't that from the Code of Hammurabi?
Yeah, let me explain what that's all about. Okay, I'm glad you brought that up. Okay, because if you look in the Code of Hammurabi, which was the Babylonian code that predates the Torah, many people believe, and remember the Jews were in exile in Babylonia. And the Torah, scholars believe, was written during Babylonian exile. So the Jews, historians and scholars believe, the Orthodox say it all comes from God. Scholars and historians believe, no. This comes from the Code of Hammurabi as well as Jewish ethics. What does the Code of Hammurabi actually say? It says, if you knock out the tooth of another person, the judgment or the punishment is going to depend. Who is it whose tooth was lost, and who is it that knocked the tooth out? So if it's a slave and he knocks out the tooth of his master, he could be executed. If it's the master and he knocks out the tooth of the slave, well then maybe he'll pay a few bucks and say have a good day, or maybe he'll pay nothing at all. So the punishment is dependent on the status of the victim and the perpetrator. What the Torah is trying to say when it says a tooth for a tooth, an eye for an eye, what it's trying to say is that the status of the perpetrator is irrelevant. It should be equal justice for all. And that was the point that they were trying to make. Many scholars say it was never taken literally. It was only used to serve as an example of equality under the law. Now, that would be nice to believe. And because we're Jewish and it's our book, we kind of want to believe it. So many people are very willing to say, oh, yes, this never really happened. But we don't know that for sure. If you want to be rational about it, there are no records that are reliable that tell us if this was ever carried out. I hate to think that it was literally carried out. I would like to believe that it was a principle that they were teaching and that was all. But we know that we can't always just believe things because we like to believe it. We have to be honest with ourselves. But the principle of equal justice is a wonderful thing. And most people have no idea about that. And most non-Jews vilify the Jewish people as cruel, barbaric, and harsh because of this law, having no idea that it actually was used in order to promote equality. Anybody else? You got some really good questions. If you wind me up, I can provide some good responses, or
That's
even if you
a good one.
don't.
To me, one of the most interesting cases really would be O.J. Simpson.
Yeah.
Now, here's a guy who used to jump through airports for Hertz, and next thing you know, he's running down a highway, hiding for his life. So, and of course, never convicted for murder, but convicted for holdup. But so the Goldman family and the Brown family, they've never gotten any closure on those crimes, and now this guy is free.
You know, the legal system is based on two different interests at the same time. It's really fascinating. If you look back at the history of the legal system, they used to have something called a trial by ordeal. If a woman was accused of being a witch, they would toss her into a lake. If the woman drowned, she was considered innocent. If she didn't drown, she was considered to be a witch, and then she was tortured and executed because only a witch could survive that. So they had these gruesome, grotesque ways of enforcing justice. Another way is you would hire a knight to joust. So two litigants would hire knights. If you were poor, you didn't have the right to get access to the legal system anyway, so it didn't matter. But if you had a case, you'd hire knights, and whichever knight won, that was the one who was right. They figured God will sort it all out. And so they would fight it out, and the winner was presumed to be correct. We still have that mentality in the legal system today, as ridiculous as it is. It has nothing to do with who's right. But today we do the same thing. We hire high-priced attorneys, and we go to court, and we use all types of tricks and devices to fool a jury. And then whoever comes out on top, if they're competing, whoever comes out on top, they win. And I agree with you, Stanley, justice was not even remotely done in that case. It was all based on tricks and sleight of hand and mirrors, and if it doesn't fit, you must acquit. It's all based on all nonsense. It's not based on, now there's another competing value in the legal system, and that is trying to get the truth to come out. So you use depositions and you use discovery and you can cross-examine, and then the truth is going to come out. So there's two competing views. One is, let's just fight it out and see who's better, who's smarter, who's got the better looking attorney, who's got the person who can charm and persuade. And the other thing is, let's have the truth figured out. And these two don't always go together hand in glove, if you'll pardon the expression. So I believe that the legal system is really messed up because I've seen it happen too often. And also, if you have a lot of money, you can get better witnesses and stuff. So OJ had tons of money. And so he got all these high-powered attorneys. And I think they turn justice on its head. And then this happens all the time. We know about it through OJ, but I know about it because I spent the last 40 years in court. And when it happens with OJ, or if a person is wrongfully convicted, then you see in a very dramatic fashion how horrible it is when justice isn't done. But every day in the court system of this country, somebody goes to court and somebody uses some kind of trick to make them owe them maybe $100,000, $200,000, and their life is pretty much really destroyed. I mean, they will lose everything they have because somebody was able to fool a jury or do something like that. I've seen it happen all the time. And it's really quite disgusting that attorneys go into court knowing that they're not serving the interests of truth, and that judges don't hold them accountable, and the whole system is kind of messed up. And I could get into trouble right now. I'm still a practicing attorney. The legal system says that I should not do anything to impugn the integrity of the legal system, or otherwise I could be held accountable and sanctioned by the Florida bar. I don't care. And I will say publicly that the legal system is plagued with problems and with injustice. And the Torah says tzedek tzedek tirdof, we should seek and pursue justice. The Torah was our first step, not our last. But as Jews, we should care deeply about justice.
Yep.
Anybody else?
So based on what you just said, do we put this recording on YouTube or not?
Absolutely. I'm hoping somebody will come after me because I'll be the test case. I do not mind at all. And Sharon, I believe if I was in jail, I could still probably shoot a video from my jail cell. I still have Shabbat services would still go on.
Might have bars in the way. I don't know.
Yeah, there'd be bars in the way.
Bar and the bar.
You know, all you have to do.
Might not be as good either.
All you have to do is look at the Rittenhouse case to see the injustice of it all.
Oh yeah, the Rittenhouse case. Yeah.
Or as you say, Rabbi, the rotten house, right?
Yeah, he came from a rotten house. His mother's like driving him to a war zone with a semi-automatic weapon. Yeah, there's a lot of crazy stuff. I wish that the legal system would just focus on getting the truth out and find out what really happened. That would be so much better than these depositions and these gotcha questions, and a lot of information is kept out from the jury. Oh, you can introduce this to the jury. Like a guy does something like he's got 18 different violations before this one, and they're all pretty similar, but no, you can't introduce any of those. That would, I mean, sometimes it makes sense, but a lot of times the law and common sense, they have nothing to do with each other. I sued Jews for Jesus, and I had them dead to rights. I had a case where these guys totally lied about my client, and I had them dead to rights. But a Jewish judge, thought it was very politically incorrect, didn't care for me suing a Christian group. And he says, that's called an anti-Christian bigot. I said, no, I do a lot of work with Christians. I don't like Christian organizations that lie and say that you can be Jewish and believe in Jesus. And the son lied about the mother and said that he converted her, because they get brownie points with the group if they say that somebody converted. And so he made up a lie and said his mother converted to Christianity, and she was horrified and said that it was defamation in her circle to say that she had converted to Christianity. This was defamatory. So the other side argued, Silver is an anti-Christian bigot. There's nothing defamatory about calling somebody a Christian. What is he trying to say? That if you're a Christian, that's a horrible thing, and that he doesn't like Christians? And I said, no, it's not a horrible thing, unless you're Jewish. Then it might not be such a good thing to say you're Christian. Anyway, the judge tossed the case out and awarded attorney's fees against me from the others to pay the other side. Ordered me to pay Jews for Jesus. So I filed an appeal, and this was the only case I ever had that went all the way to the Florida Supreme Court, and I won. I won, and the Supreme Court said to the judge, not only were you wrong assessing fees against Silver, you were wrong to throw the case out. It's a valid claim, which made the judge look really bad, because not only did he dismiss it, he awarded fees against me, which is a really extreme move. It has to be extremely frivolous, which he said it was. Anyway, so the case goes back to the same judge that I made look bad. And this judge managed to do a few things that were really horrible against me. I won't go into the details, but in any event, I had the same winning case, and I was ordered to pay $150,000 in attorney's fees for things that this judge found that he thought I did improperly, which was all nonsense. And then I had to make a very, very painful decision. If I kept litigating, the $150,000 would have mushroomed up to probably $500,000. And also, if you're an attorney, you can't escape judgments very easily. They have ways of going after you, taking your bar license away, taking your driver's license away, taking everything away. And so I won the case in the Florida Supreme Court. But I ended up paying all of that money. I paid every penny of it. And what was worse, I dropped the case even though we had them dead to rights. The truth never came out, and nobody even cared. I had proof that it was a lie, but nobody really cared. And I'll tell you one thing, that was one of the reasons why, to this day, I am not a full-time practicing attorney. When that happened, I mean, I've gone through a lot. I've taken on very controversial cases, taken on cases where I've had my life threatened many times, taken on cases where I worked a decade pro bono. I've taken on all types of highly controversial cases, and I loved every minute of it, but I did not love that. And when that happened, well, I felt horrible also for my family. But when that happened, I said, I will not place my fate and the fate of my family and their financial future in the hands of a judge, especially one that doesn't care for my point of view. And so I vowed at that time, I will become a full-time rabbi. I will keep doing law. I'll keep helping people as much as I can, and I'll keep handling civil rights, environmental cases, but I'm not going to devote my entire career to this profession. That was one of about 4 different cases that were like that in the legal system because of a political axis some judge had or something like that. It was a very traumatic year for me. And that's one of the reasons why I speak from firsthand knowledge that if a judge doesn't care for you, or if something goes wrong, they can devastate your life, even though they're not going to kill you. And I deal also with a guy named Mark Roseman. Mark Roseman was told by a judge, you can never see your children again. Absolute custody was given to his ex. And I know Mark Roseman. He's a beautiful, wonderful human being. And he was not allowed to see his children ever again. And he was so emotionally devastated that he formed an organization called the Toby Center, which fights against what they call parental alienation. Many of us are familiar with that syndrome, where one parent tries to turn the kids against the other if they have a lot of anger towards the other, and they want to get back at the parent. But when it's played out in court, and when judges go along with it and then deny someone the right to visitation at all, the effects are devastating. He has an organization, the Toby Center. I've done a lot of work with them, and he's spoken to us on occasion. And also, we've done some work supporting his organization. Anyway, the legal system can be very, very devastating. And most people have no clue what's going on. Nobody really knows what the judges are doing. You know, the judges come up for election and you have no idea. You have no idea what they're doing. So you usually just vote them in. But we do need judicial reform. Anyway, I hadn't planned on going into all that, but now you know.
So is that judge still in place in Florida?
No, I think he's done. I think he's retired. Yeah.
Okay, I was going to say like Valerie, he's probably been promoted to I don't know, governor of the state or something.
Oh, yeah, right.
Russian mediocrity rises to the top.
Probably, yeah. By the way, I've had also some incredible victories in court that were really exhilarating and thrilling. And so I don't want you to think that, I have a very jaundiced view because the cases always go wrong. I've had some incredible victories, including on behalf of abortion rights, on behalf of the environment, we have animal rights, representing a guy flying the flag in Jupiter who prevailed. And I've had some incredibly wonderful experiences in the law. And I don't mean to discourage people from going into law. It can be a really great field, and you can do a lot of good. You can really, really do a lot of good in the legal system, but it needs to be reformed. Someday I'll compile a little montage of some of the more interesting cases that I've handled. The dog that was allowed into the association, but they had a weight limit and started gaining weight, and they said the dog has to go. And then the guy who had a car that was deemed too ugly, the guy that painted the driveway a wrong shade of blue, the guy that cut down his own bush, and they fined him for doing that, even though it was a hazard. All types of crazy condo cases. The condo commanders doing all types of crazy stuff that I've defended against, and a lot of fascinating abortion cases that I've had, throwing out a law in Florida that was anti-abortion, and going up against Operation Rescue. A lot of interesting cases out there. Anyway, I think we've had a great discussion.